Olivia VanClief gave birth to Viola VanClief on April the 2nd, 2007. When Viola was 2 days old, she was taken from Olivia at the hospital because Olivia was not taking her Seroquel medication. Olivia had stopped because she was not sure what the effect would be on Viola. Olivia knew Kiana Barker from church when they were young and when Barker was pregnant with her first child. Olivia asked Barker to take care of Viola, and she did. After Olivia started taking her medication regularly, Viola was returned to her 2 weeks later. Viola was again removed from Olivia's care a year and a half later and was placed with Barker again at Olivia's request. Viola had a sickle cell trait but not diabetes. Fire Captain Ronald Harmon on March the 4th, 2010 responded to a call to go to Barker's home on East Gage Avenue in Los Angeles, arriving at 2:21 p.m. Barker's boyfriend flagged him down. Once inside, Captain Harmon saw a little girl on the living room floor, lying lifeless on her back on a blanket. Barker was standing next to the child, talking on the phone to a 911 dispatcher. Captain Harmon could not find a pulse and the child was not breathing. He asked what happened and Barker replied the baby had choked on apple juice. Captain Harmon rolled the baby over and saw bruising on the left side of her back and left hip. Her skin was very cool. Firefighter Michael Pagluso was on the call and saw that the baby wasn't breathing. He heard Barker and her boyfriend say that the baby had been drinking apple juice. He and another paramedic did CPR on the baby until the ambulance arrived 2 minutes later. He carried the baby to the gurney and paramedics continued the CPR while he drove the ambulance to the hospital. Kiana Barker rode with them in the front seat. It was said Barker's demeanor was very cold, not very worried, but nervous. Barker did not cry, but she did ask several times, "Is she going to be okay?" The paramedics took Viola into the emergency room and laid her on a gurney, where Dr. Joshua Partnow shined a light into her eyes and saw they were fixed and dilated, which was a bad sign. She did not have a pulse and she was not breathing. After 45 minutes of CPR and the insertion of a breathing tube, he managed to get a faint heartbeat. As he worked on Viola, he saw a lot of bruising, so he called the trauma doctor for backup. Dr. Partnow asked Barker what happened to the baby, and she said Viola had not been acting normally that day and had slept late. He then asked her about the bruising. She said that Viola got stuck in between the mattress and a bed railing, but denied any other trauma. Dr. Partnow suspected child abuse. Dr. David Duarte, a staff surgeon on a call for trauma, Dr. Duarte took Viola to the operating room and opened up Viola's chest to massage her heart, which started to beat but then arrested several times. He saw swelling and bruising on her left hip and her buttocks, consistent with child abuse. Viola never stabilized, and Dr. Duarte pronounced her dead at 4:26 p.m. So the question remained, what actually happened? LAPD police officer Gabriel Lopez had been called out to the hospital and asked Barker what had happened. Barker said Viola hadn't been feeling that well, so she fed her, put her down for a nap, and lay down with her for about 5 minutes. Barker then left the room. When she returned 5 minutes later, Viola wasn't breathing and Barker called 911. Officer Lopez thought Barker was pretty calm. Under the circumstances, he expected someone to be a little more distraught. Dr. James Ribe, the coroner, testified that he did an autopsy of Viola on March 6, 2010. She was 2 years old, 34 inches tall, and weighed 35 pounds. His opinion was that she died from blunt force trauma, meaning blows inflicted by an adult, along with internal bleeding, blood loss, and fluid loss. Viola had a large contusion on her right armpit and shoulder and several abrasions on her left hip area. Bruises appeared on Viola's chest and the right side of her hip. She had multiple small white scars, he believed, which were caused by burns from a small, very hot object, such as a match. Wow, what really did happen? Her buttocks were swollen and red, and there were bruises on the back of her right leg and on the front of her left hip. The coroner said that given the level of injuries that she had, an adult would have to strike Viola with everything they have with their arm. In other words, using maximum force possible. The scabbed injuries would have occurred at least a few hours before Viola's death, possibly longer. The abrasion on her left flank was very recent and had the pattern of a shoe mark, consistent with someone kicking Viola. There was also a double red mark on Viola's left lower abdomen, which looked like a pinch mark or a mark from a stick. The blow to Viola's armpit was a result of very severe force and had caused blood to collect in the chest cavity around her lung. As a result of the blood loss into her chest, Viola would have gone into shock rapidly, which meant her blood stopped circulating and her brain ceased functioning, as well as her heart and other vital organs, contributing to her death, with bleeding and fluid loss severe enough to impair her circulation and make her more vulnerable to dying from the chest injury. The injuries to her buttocks occurred anywhere from a half hour to 24 hours before her heart stopped. Viola's injuries could not have been caused accidentally, as the marks were on different areas of the body and came from different directions. And more importantly, the marks were not consistent with being stuck between the metal railings of a bed. Nothing that occurred in the emergency room or operating room would have caused her injuries. Viola appeared otherwise healthy, except for some evidence of sickle cell trait, which would make her more vulnerable to the effects of soft tissue injury, stress, and blood loss. Dr. Ribe's opinion was that the cause of death was homicide. Pediatrician Dr. Carol Berkowitz was certified as an expert in trauma in children. She had reviewed Viola's file. Viola was a healthy 2.5-year-old who, when she arrived at the hospital, was in full cardiac arrest. After reviewing the medical records and the autopsy report, the pediatrician concluded that Viola suffered extensive trauma and hemorrhagic shock. Dr. Berkowitz believed her death was caused by child abuse. Bed railings could not have caused her injuries. Dr. Berkowitz did not see a pattern consistent with a belt buckle or a hammer. Kiana Barker's daughter, who was 9 years old at the time of Viola's death, testified that in 2010 she lived in Barker's house with Barker, Barker's boyfriend Julian, Julian's son James, and Viola. She and Viola shared a bedroom and slept in bunk beds, with Viola on the bottom bunk. She did say that a bed with railings was across the house in James's room, but she said she never really remembered Viola ever sitting on that bed. Viola was pretty well behaved, but if she threw a tantrum, Barker would discipline her with a pop in the hand, that's it. When Kiana's daughter misbehaved, she would get by Barker, who used a belt on her buttocks. Wow. March the 3rd, 2010 felt like a normal day to the daughter who went to school, and when she came back, she went into the kitchen to make noodles for herself and Viola, who seemed happy and healthy. The daughter played with Viola before they went to bed around 7 to 8 p.m. The next day, March the 4th, Viola was asleep when Kiana's daughter left for school, which is normal. But when the daughter got home, Viola was gone. Right after Viola died, Barker told her daughter not to say certain things to the police. After the daughter talked to the police the day Viola died, Barker yelled at her saying, "I told you not to say nothing to these people." Barker was upset that she told the police that Julian and James lived in Barker's house. She said apparently Julian had the anger issues, but Barker did not. The daughter had not talked to her mother about her testimony. She loved her mother and wanted to help her. She remembered that she had told the detective that she felt safer when Julian was around. A friend of Kiana Barker, named Valerie, testified that she was friendly with Julian and Barker and had known them for more than 10 years. On March the 3rd, 2010, Barker picked her up and took her to her house. When Julian was out back in his man house with someone named Leon, Barker and Valerie were drinking hard alcohol in the house, and Valerie was faded but was still together. Around 3 to 4 p.m., Viola got a but that wasn't no ordinary whooping. Barker, who was busy around the house, looked into Viola's room, got upset, and said, "I'm tired of this. I can't handle this. Julian, come fix this." Barker picked up something like a man's construction belt. Valerie grabbed her by the arm, but Barker told her, "Let go, or I'm going to use this on you." So Valerie was trying to stop her. Barker then went into Viola's room, and all Valerie could hear from the room was plow, plow, plow with the belt. These are her words directly. She heard Viola crying until she grasped her last breath. Viola felt the incident went on too long. She heard Barker yell, "Get your ass up there," and then a boom like a swing against the wall. Valerie tried to get into the room, but Barker had her feet against the door. Valerie told her, "That's too much, stop," and she said she was going to get Julian. Valerie ran outside to get Julian and told him he needed to go inside right now. Finally, she convinced him to go in. She pointed to Viola's room, and Julian went in and picked up Barker from behind. Julian carried Barker, who was furious and sweating, back to their room. Valerie crept into Viola's room and saw her on her bed, not moving much. Julian asked Barker, "What did Viola do?" and told Valerie she had to leave. Several hours later, Barker drove Valerie home and said, "I'm sorry you had to see that." Then Barker called Valerie later that evening to check if she was okay. I think she was embarrassed. She and Julian visited Valerie, and Barker told her Viola passed the next day after I whooped her. Barker told Valerie the police would come to talk to her, and Barker wanted her not to mention the incident. Barker said Viola died because she had diabetes, had a seizure after she had some Similac, and Barker had given her the wrong medicine. Julian then came into the room and said to Barker, "Baby, let's forget this. You know you ain't got to talk to her about nothing, because when it comes down to it, if she winds up involved in this, we involved in it. She's going to come up missing. She says something wrong about me or her." Valerie took this as a threat, as if she goes to the police and tells them what actually happened, well, then Julian might do something. During the trial, Valerie denied any romantic interest in Kiana Barker. She had never before seen Barker behave the way she did on the day she struck Viola. The memory of that day had haunted Valerie ever since Barker told her that Viola had died. Now, LAPD detective Calvin DeHesa was the investigating officer. He went to the hospital on March the 4th, 2010, and spoke with Barker and her daughter. The daughter had told him that Julian was protective and she felt safe around him. She mentioned no anger issues with Julian. When the detective interviewed Barker at the hospital on March the 4th, she had just learned that Viola was dead. He said her demeanor was pretty calm and she did not seem too upset. Barker told the detective that Julian did not live with her, although he had spent the night when they were together. She explained that the day before Viola died, her lower torso got stuck in the bed railings. Barker used a hammer with a blue or grey grip to break some of the railings to free Viola. Viola got a few scratches from the metal, and Barker might have hit her in the buttocks. Barker threw the bed out in a lot nearby the same day. Barker said to the detective, "I'm not trying to cry," to which the detective said, "It's okay to cry." And with this detective, she still claimed the story of the bed and the railings. On the morning of March the 4th, Viola woke up late, around 10 a.m. She seemed tired and was not her usual jolly self. Barker was cleaning the house to get ready for her monthly inspection by the Department of Children and Family Services and gave Viola a burrito and some Pedialyte mixed with water. Now, because Viola did not seem to be her normal self, Barker lay her down and just rested with her. She got up to clean some more, and on her way back to check on Viola, she called Julian. When she got to the bedroom, Viola was not breathing. Barker tried CPR. Viola spit up food and water, tried to breathe, and just stopped. Barker told Julian that Viola wasn't breathing, and then they called 911. Later that day, the detective did a walkthrough of Barker's home with Barker, a recording of which was played for the jury. The bed she had thrown out in the alley was no longer there, and the hammer she showed him was yellow. No belt was found. At the end of the recording, Barker said, "I know that I'm the prime suspect, but we all have to wait on the autopsy report to come back. I'll be that prime suspect until y'all find out what happened to her, because I know how it works. Y'all don't have to blow smoke up my pipe. This is reality." On March the 9th, Barker was arrested, but then she was released 2 days later. And it was after that she went to Valerie's house telling her, "Hey, don't tell the police everything." But on July the 15th, 2010, she was arrested again. Barker testified that she had been providing foster care since 2005. She knew Viola's biological mother, Olivia, and had fostered Viola twice. Viola was a lovable, smiling child who was a little delayed and had been helped by therapy. Olivia did have weekend visitation. Barker was in the process of adopting Viola and was close to finalizing the adoption. Barker and Julian had a child who was 6 months old at the time of Viola's death. One of the foster care rules was that anyone with unexcusable felonies could not be in the household, and she believed Julian had felony convictions. Julian was living with her in March 2010, and she knew she wasn't supposed to have him in the house. Julian could be violent and once choked her with a phone cord, and she was afraid of him. Now, she claimed, when she was giving her testimony, that Valerie had a romantic interest in her and wanted to be with her, but Barker told her, "I don't swing that way." You see how she tried to bring down Valerie with her? A few months after Viola died, Valerie was at Barker's house and she and Julian started to argue. Barker and Julian took her home, where her boyfriend also argued with Julian. Valerie called Barker 2 weeks later and told Barker that she had ruined her life. As she continued her testimony, she claimed again that on March the 3rd, 2010, she was cleaning the house in preparation for child services to come. Viola got stuck in the bed rails and Barker got her out and treated her scratches. On March the 4th, while the doctors were working on Viola at the hospital, Julian arrived and told her to stop asking what was wrong. He sat her down in a chair and told her to remember the railing incident, and from then on she kept quiet and didn't tell the detective about Julian's abuse of her. She claimed she's not really sure what exactly happened to Viola. Barker acknowledged that she did not show emotion during the 911 call and the ride to the hospital. Barker admitted she had used the child's belt on her daughter on the hand and buttocks. When Viola woke up on March the 4th around 10 a.m., Barker turned on the television in Viola's room. Again, she was cleaning for the child inspection, checking now and then on Viola, who looked as if she didn't feel well. Julian was out back working in the yard and coming in occasionally. Barker went outside for about an hour to put some things into storage, and when she came back in, Julian and Viola were sitting at a children's table in the dining room. Julian told her Viola threw up, so they thought Viola was sick. She took Viola back into her room, pulled the blanket out and spread it on the floor, and lay down with her for a while. When she went back into the dining room to clean up the vomit, she heard Viola make a sound like un. Barker returned to Viola, and this is when she claims she sees her eyes rolling. She then claimed that Viola had stopped breathing and Barker was trying CPR. Viola spit up some Pedialyte and Barker heard gurgling sounds. She screamed for Viola to talk to her. Then after a few minutes, Julian came into Viola's room and Barker called 911. She dragged Viola into the living room on the blanket and followed the 911 dispatcher's directions until the paramedics arrived. Barker agreed. She did not seem emotional during her testimony, but she felt emotional. She claimed that during the trial, when she saw all the photographs of the bruises, this was the first time she had ever seen bruises on Viola. So the case that you have here is you have a child whose life is gone, and she has injuries that suggest child abuse. However, the suspect claims either the bed railings is the reason why she's got all these injuries. She was stuck in between the bed. And also, she died because she choked on her food. That was basically her argument. But unfortunately for her, given all the evidence, she was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison on February the 20th, 2014. As for Julian, I have a question for you. What do you think Julian's punishment should have been? Because he pled accessory to the fact and was sentenced to 3 years in county jail. Regardless of the sentences, the real victim was poor Viola and people like Kiana who tried to bring Valerie down. And when it came to Julian, she kind of dropped him in it too. I don't know if Julian's abuse of her was real or not, but it's clear that Kiana was the main culprit. Comment, tell me what you think.